What if peace in Ukraine isn't just about ending a war, but overthrowing a regime? Today, President Zelensky isn't pulling punches. He's calling for a transformation inside Russia, warning that without real change, Europe's future is at stake. From missile strikes over Kyiv to secret sabotage plots across the EU, this is no longer just Ukraine's fight. It's a global turning point. Get ready for the story the Kremlin doesn't want told. In the gilded halls of diplomacy, where measured language often prevails, President Volodymyr Zelensky has once again shattered convention, demanding a seismic shift not just in policy, but in power. On July 31st, speaking remotely to a global audience at the 50th anniversary of the Helsinki Final Act, the Ukrainian leader laid bare a bold and uncompromising truth. Peace in Ukraine cannot come without regime change in Moscow. It was not a call made lightly, nor one rooted merely in national frustration. Zelensky's statement arrived in the immediate aftermath of yet another barrage of Russian missiles raining down on Kyiv, an assault that seemed timed to punctuate his message with fiery clarity. The optics were unmistakable. While statesmen gathered to commemorate decades of European security dialogue, Russia reminded the continent of the fragility of those ideals. "I believe Russia can be pushed to stop this war," Zelensky declared. "It started it, and it can be made to end it. But if the world doesn't aim to change the regime in Russia, that means even after the war ends, Moscow will still try to destabilize neighboring countries." These words were not merely strategic, they were incendiary, and for good reason. The war that began in February 2022 has morphed from a regional land grab into a global test of political fortitude. Ukraine remains defiant but battered. While its cities absorb the endless cycle of sirens and explosions, its leadership sharpens its international pleas, calling not only for military aid but for ideological solidarity. Zelensky's demand signals a shift from reactive defense to proactive offense in the diplomatic arena. Hours after Russia's strike on Kyiv, Zelensky doubled down, urging Western nations to crank up economic pressure. He spoke of frozen Russian assets, billions tied up in accounts around the globe, locked away since the earliest rounds of sanctions. "Put every frozen Russian asset, including the stolen wealth of corruption, to work defending against Russian aggression," he said. "It's time to confiscate Russian assets, not just freeze them." It was a policy escalation that raised eyebrows among financial circles and geopolitical strategists alike. Freezing assets is one thing, reappropriating them for war efforts another entirely. But Zelensky's calculus is clear. Starvation of Russia's war machine requires more than symbolic gestures. It requires stripping the Kremlin of its economic lifeblood. And yet, Zelensky's impassioned speech isn't the only pressure point bearing down on Moscow. Across the Atlantic, Washington appears to be reorienting its stance. U.S. President Donald Trump, long a polarizing figure in Ukraine's saga, has hinted at an expedited resolution. According to senior diplomat John Kelly, Trump now desires a peace deal by August 8, a deadline just over a week away. The shift, while abrupt, isn't without precursor. On July 29th, Trump warned that tariffs on Russia would take effect within 10 days unless there was a full-scale retreat. Notably, these measures would not only strike directly at Russian exports, but would extend their sting to countries continuing to engage with the Kremlin, namely China and India. Sweeping secondary sanctions of this kind are a geopolitical sledgehammer. If enacted, they could recalibrate global energy markets, destabilize long-standing alliances, and place considerable pressure on countries attempting to straddle neutrality. Trump's new line, whether driven by mounting frustration or political calculus, marks a turning point in the West's appetite for confrontation. Meanwhile, attempts to broker peace remain gridlocked. "No progress," said U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio on July 31st, succinctly summarizing the diplomatic malaise. For every olive branch extended, Moscow responds with fresh artillery. Negotiations, at least for now, exist more in theory than practice. The stalemate is compounded by creeping paranoia across the European Union. Russian sabotage operations have reportedly increased in frequency and complexity, targeting infrastructure, officials, and information systems. The shadow war, often invisible, always insidious, is becoming harder to ignore. In Warsaw, alarm bells are growing louder. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk, speaking on July 25th, warned that Russia may be ready for a potential military confrontation with Europe within 2 years. For Poland, which shares borders with Belarus and Russia's heavily fortified Kaliningrad exclave, the implication is chilling. Any conflict would place it directly in the line of fire. Tusk's warning was not a hypothetical, it was a strategic forecast. Adding weight to the argument, the Kremlin's history of aggression toward Ukraine has been punctuated by assassination attempts on Zelensky himself. As Russian forces surged toward Kyiv in the early days of the invasion, intelligence agencies foiled at least 3 attempts to eliminate the Ukrainian president. The threats were not isolated incidents. They were part of a coordinated campaign to decapitate Ukrainian leadership and install a puppet regime sympathetic to Russian interests. Yet Zelensky survived, Kyiv held, and the narrative shifted from one of doomed resistance to one of heroic defiance. Today, that defiance resonates beyond Ukrainian borders. The call for regime change in Russia is no longer taboo. It's table talk at global summits. The idea that peace requires new leadership in Moscow is gaining traction, even if it's fraught with legal, ethical, and strategic challenges. The question remains, will the West act? The confiscation of assets, the imposition of tariffs, and the orchestration of political isolation are tools within reach. But every move carries risk: economic backlash, cyber retaliation, or wider military engagement. Still, Zelensky's message is clear: inaction is complicity. For Europe, the stakes could not be higher. The ghost of Cold War divisions looms large, and Russia's overt and covert maneuvers suggest a desire to redraw borders, both literal and ideological. If Poland's warning proves true, the continent may face its gravest security crisis in decades. Zelensky has offered a choice, not just for Ukraine, but for the world. Continue to treat Russia's aggression as a solvable dispute within its current framework, or acknowledge that the structure itself is broken, that the solution may not lie in ceasefires and conferences, but in political transformation. And for now, with missiles overhead and enemies at the gate, Ukraine waits, not just for aid, but for conviction. As Russia doubles down on destruction and Western leaders weigh their next move, one thing is clear: this war isn't confined to borders. Zelensky's call for regime change may be controversial, but for many, it's the only path to lasting peace. The question now is, will the world rise to meet this moment? Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell for more deep dives into the stories shaping our world.